Hello everyone, this is Talents in Games Conference. Welcome. My name is Igor and I'm going to be the host for today. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have so many viewers from all over the world to join us. We are bringing you great content also delivered from all parts of the world. So we expect great talks related to game design, community management and development today. We will have 4 lectures and we are just about to start. So first of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, which are JetBrains and G5 Games. Thank you very much for your support and for helping us to host this great conference. And I guess that's enough of me talking right now. We expect great speakers from Zynga to join us for the great lectures, which is going to be delivered by Poornima and Vimal from this company. So I believe we already have the speakers in the studio with us. Hey guys, how are you?
Hello, we're good. How are you?
Also doing great. Very excited for your talk. Before we start, we have a few, like I would say maybe traditions to talk about some things related to games in general with our speakers, because as I believe, we all, the people who work in the game industry, love the games and play the games on the regular basis, don't they? So what I would want to learn for today, like gamers are known for patiently waiting for their favorite games to be launched. And I was wondering, what game are you waiting for the most? It could be like some real title, like for me, I'm waiting so much for the Elder Scrolls Part 6 to be released, maybe somewhere like next year or the year after the next year, I don't know. Or maybe some imaginary game, like, I don't know, like maybe you have a favorite character or you expect a next generation Star Wars game to be released. So, Poornima, what about you? What game do you expect the most to be released?
Well, I think along with a lot of others, I'm still waiting for Cyberpunk 2077. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how amazing that game is.
Yeah. Vimal, and you?
Hands down cyberpunk. Like, I think that's the next big thing that everyone's looking forward to. Booked, ready, and just waiting for it to be released.
That's so great. Yeah, I believe like when I was thinking about this question, I was almost sure that it would be the most common answer. Because yesterday I was asking speakers about what's their favorite game, and most of the guys told that their favorite game is The Witcher 3. So CD Projekt Red, they like rocks. So, great. All right. So we are very excited for your talk. Over to you right now. You may start. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into our session. And thank you, Igor and WN Media team, for inviting us and giving us this opportunity for a Talented Games Conference. So, we are going to be talking about D7 via 7 designs. It's essentially the pillars to improve retention through fundamental design decisions. So, I'll just get started with me. I'm Poornima Seetharaman. I am a lead game designer at Zynga currently. I have about 15 years of experience in this industry. I have worked on titles like, for mobile titles like Bioshock, Predator, Bruce Lee, How to Train Your Dragons. I've dabbled with Social Casino and even co founded 2 of my indie studios. I'm also a speaker, mentor, and Women in Games ambassador. I have recently been inducted into the Global Hall of Fame and also the runner up for Mentor of the Year by Women Tech Network. You can catch me up on my website, which is drolife.com. And so now that I've introduced myself, I'm going to hand it over to my amazing co speaker, Vimal, to introduce himself.
Uh, I have to say, like, Poornima is pretty modest about the whole thing, but we definitely super proud of her achievements and the fact that she is the first Indian ever to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I mean, how cool is it to say that I work with a Hall of Famer, right? So, yeah, a little bit about myself. I also work as a lead game designer at Zynga. I have close to 16 years of experience. Back in the day, I did my master's from Carnegie Mellon in the US, spent the better half of a decade working over there. If anyone's familiar with The Art of Game Design, the book, I was the teacher's assistant to Jesse Shell, who wrote that. I worked, or I had the opportunity to work on some solid IPs like UFC Undisputed, which sort of like ended up being number one on the App Store when it got released. Obviously, Farm 2, AMC's Walking Dead. I'm going to say it's not the Telltale version, unfortunately, but the IP is what's important. Night at the Museum, just a few of the titles, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So over to you, Poonam.
Thank you, Vimal. Thank you for that amazing introduction. And so let's talk about retention and the what, why, and how. So, retention is always one of the most important metrics that we chase early on the game and even for the longer duration of it. So, what is retention, right? If you put it simply, it's nothing but the measure of players still playing your game after a certain period of time. Now we talk about D1, D7, D30, and the likes of it. But from a design standpoint, what is it that we are trying to measure? Now, so when we talk about D1, right, we are talking about how fun and entertaining your core gameplay is. By the time we're talking about D7, we're talking about how the code loop of your game is performing, how engaging the meta game is, right? By the time it's D30, it's a clear signal for us to understand if the meta game is performing as expected. What about the deep social experiences or the endowment progress that the player is feeling, depending on the game that you've been making? Now, while this is not about early retention, but some point of time, some reasonable point, your game retention graph is going to flatten out, right? When it flattens out, those retained players become your base users or your elder players. They are in the system for longer duration. Now they become like one of the best user base for you to experiment with monetization, and this is also giving you the opportunity that this is probably when you can invest into paid marketing channels to revive more user base besides your other areas. So this retention also helps you in understanding when to invest money into marketing. I'm not talking about the early user acquisition, I'm talking about later in the game. So retention not only helps in understanding engagement, but also in helping us to understand when do we bring in new users into the system. So now let's talk about a typical D7 performance. This is D7 performance of some of the top categories in India. As you can see that the puzzle, the card, the board, and the sports category seems to do a better D7 retention compared to few others. Now, this will vary from country to country depending on the aligned interest of the demographic and penetration of mobile devices and even trends of these genres, right? Like word games, for example, on a global average seems to do really well. Puzzle continues to take that, and casino and card games also continue to work on that level. Now let's talk about why is retention important. To put it very simply, it helps in the game's longevity, right? Now, we have put together a few things here. These are the factors that affect the game's longevity. Now, we have often heard people tell us like the first 5 minutes of any game can, make or break the game. The first 5 minutes experience is crucial, and which is true because if after the first 5 minutes the player still wants to be part of the game world, we have sold them on the core idea of the game. It doesn't matter what kind of game you're making. Now, what happens is when players enjoy the experiences we have built for them, they get hooked, right? And this is important to increase what we call the LTV of the player, which is lifetime value of the player. And acknowledgement of a good game often leads to recognition, right? And the extension of recognition in a way is virality, or at least the start of virality. Now, forget games for a second. Let's talk about any product that you use. And if you use the product and you really like it, you're going to be like happy with it. You kind of have the whole recognition moment because your experience has been good. And the next thing you do usually is talk about it to someone else, maybe friend or family member or whoever. And virality kind of begins slow with word of mouth in the smaller groups, and then it can go to something much larger. Now, for example, we can talk about Among Us, which is like a huge sensation now. But it was a game that has been in existence for 2 years. But it took a South Korean streamer who picked the game up and put it out, and then people started streaming, and the US picked up. And today it's a worldwide sensation. Everyone is playing Among Us, and it's a lovely game. So, what happens is it allows the creators to also bet on the marketing opportunities. The virality helps them make sure that since the game has potential and it has been validated, we can push in some money to into the marketing channels. Now, what this also helps us is we can provide, it gives us some monetization opportunities for us. So people don't mind spending money on something that they enjoy. It's a good game. They feel that it is justified, right? Collectively put this together, we can call it success, right? Now, what does success essentially bring? Besides us achieving success, it can also lay ground for the foundation for future work, which is divided into, say, two components, right? For example, one aspect of it is that future iterations or similar genres, reusing code base, user analysis, all this becomes a huge thing. So for us, we have the Farmville franchise, right? From Farmville 1 to Farmville 2 to Country Escape to Tropic Escape, and soon to be out Farm 3. So we have this entire, iterations and similar genres that we have created using the same understanding of a success from a previous model. Now, it also gives rise to brand value. It allows for credibility, like people tend to have a larger appetite to check out games made by the same brand that they have played or they're currently playing and they have enjoyed. So, not only success is crucial for just the game, it also allows us to look into the future in these two ways. Now, let's talk about why do players retain. So we put together a small loop. Uh, Fun. People are having fun playing the game, and of course, fun is subjective. It varies from people to people, kind of genre you're accessing, kind of games you're making. But essentially, people enjoying it in whatever way they like, right? Like we do have player archetypes and player personas to understand why they have fun or why they engage with the game. But keeping that aside for now, we are generally talking about people having a lot of fun playing the game. Now, growth is where, like, by playing the game, you get some reward, some power that you're making yourself better, you're growing, you're progressing, you're taking it to the next level. And an automatic result of that is the mastery. Now, mastering the game basically feels like you're overcoming new challenges, you're getting better at it, you can tackle it and complete it much better than before. And together, it brings into something we call the shared experiences. Like you find your tribe and you share the experiences together. It can be online, it can be offline, it can be cooperative, it can be competitive, it can be simply about bragging or giving someone philanthropic, any of those, right? So together we are putting this loop. Essentially, if you think about it, it is nothing but the positive feedback loop, right? Positive feedback loop talks about achievements earns rewards, rewards grants power, and power eases the next achievement. What we've also included is the social component, because with free to play games, the social component becomes a very crucial aspect. Now, now let's talk about, we have talked about the what and the why, and let's now get started on the how, which is the seven design pillars. We are going to be talking about the seven design pillars on a high level. It's actually a basic foundation that is helpful for someone who's getting started on designing free to play games, or even as a refresher course for someone who has spent their time considerably on this. Because, Vimal and I have discussed this, and often we talk about that once we engage with the game and we have worked on it for a long time, it's often the basics that we forget. So going back to foundations is very key, and it's a great thing to like refresh ourselves and look from that mindset. Um, this is actually catered towards a more free to play game direction. But as designers, we feel that these basics are applicable across any design that you might be creating. Like I said, coming back to the foundation. So this is merely a guidebook for you to take from and then extend the way you want for your game. And before we dive in, what we've also done is for your convenience, we've added these icons across the coming slides. So keep a lookout for them. We are talking about what are the driving psychological factors that will, trigger this particular pillar. And we're also giving you some example games for setting the context. because a lot of it is the pillars are also very tied into different psychology aspects, which is why we are able to create that effect from the player. Now, the very first pillar is core loop. I'm sure most of you have heard it. Like, this is a very common thing that is happening through social games. Everyone asks about what is the core loop of your game. Now, what essentially is core loop is nothing but it is a chain of actions you do over and over again. It could lead to like grinding or whittling or any of those effects. Now, what you can also talk about now, let's take the example of Farmville to Country Escape, where we are saying, okay, we have planted a crop, we are going to harvest it, we're crafting recipes, we're fulfilling orders, we are trading items, and that in turn gives us XP and coins, which allow us to unlock something new, and then we repeat the process, right? Now, essentially, a core loop can also be broken into simpler self-sustaining loops. So what will be the simpler loop in the same example? Let's take out the recipes and the trading component of it, and we still have the simpler sustaining loop, which is the crops. You're planting the crops, harvesting it, you're fulfilling orders, you're earning XP and coins, and then you're unlocking new crop types and repeating the process, right? Now, from a design standpoint, besides like what are you expecting by having the core loop right, you are going to target the game session length and the engagement of it, right? You want people to get hooked and repeatedly the mundane activity in give them some sort of a flow state. Now, this is essentially we talk about compulsion, the willingness to continue the game. So we could offer like what are the regular challenges in that session like that keeps you motivated to come to the next level and keep playing the game. Now the other aspect of it is the craving, the willingness to return to the game, right? So now let's talk about how do we do that, and that's player callback. Now, before we get deeper into it, let's talk about the Fogg model. So, BJ Fogg is the founder of the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab. So, he created this behavioral model to explain what makes people act. Now, he believes that if you give the right trigger, people act on it, provided they have the motivation and the ability to do it, right? So, which means if a behavior does not occur, one of these elements is not in place. One of the most commonly explained example for Fox model is that you want to speak with the caller, which is the motivation. Your phone is within reach, which is your ability, and then you heard it ring, which is the prompt or the trigger. Now, if I take another example, which is exercising. So you have a sedentary lifestyle and you're not that motivated, but then you finally decide, okay, I'm going to start exercising now. But now you know your motivation is low. And if I'm going to say, like, okay, starting tomorrow, I'm going to directly exercise like 2 3 hours in a day, my motivation is low and my ability to do it is hard. So very likely my trigger is going to fall and I'm not going to live through what I told myself. Now, say on the other hand, if I'm highly motivated to do it, I might still be able to pull it off, right? Now, ideally, if otherwise on the other side of things, if I set up like 5 to 10 minutes a day, even though my motivation is low, but my ability to do it is high, so I might have a much better chance of succeeding here. Now, behavioral model, fog model is a generic behavioral model, can be applied to anything across any mediums. So how do we do it in games? Yeah. So now in games, let's talk about the first one, which is driving loss aversion. Now, what is loss aversion? Loss aversion is a psychological tactic that establishes that people are more motivated to avoid a loss than pursue a gain because they feel invested. You know, it's a personal thing for them. Now, in Farmville, withering was a classic example of this. What happens is that in withering, if you don't come back in a certain window after the crop is ready, it actually gets withered and you have a very small window to come back and revive it. Now, it becomes a lovely appointment mechanic, as we call it. Like basically, people want to come back and make sure that doesn't happen to their crop. Now, a loss aversion tactic is often used only if the player is invested in your game. So you need to know as designers when that happens and what level of loss aversion should you be introducing into the game. And if you do introduce, what are the workarounds for that loss aversion to prevent it? Like, how do you help enable the players to do it? So now one of the things we did was wither protection. Now wither protection is a great monetization opportunity also and makes the player happy as well. The other non-monetization element of it was that we enabled friends to restore the lost plans for you. Now, this while is free, but it also calls for social engagement, which was very critical for Farmville because it was on Facebook, right? Now, if loss aversion comes with all these conditions apply, so if you feel it's tricky at this stage, what are the other drivers for player callback? So now let's talk about FOMO, which is fear of missing out. This is a very common feeling that we as humans experience, right? Like if you extend it from the Fox model, we are chilling at home, you're decided to rest it out for the day, and your friend calls and says like, "Hey, I'm hosting a party, and all of our other friends are going to be there," and now you're like, "But I decided not to do anything for the day." But now you're pondering and thinking, what if like my crush comes there, or maybe something cool happens there, all my friends are going to have some amazing discussions and I'm going to miss out on it. So it doesn't even matter what intensity it is, right? Like you still have that thought in the back of your mind, and that's what FOMO is. So while loss aversion on one hand talks about avoiding a loss over pursuing a gain, FOMO does the exact opposite. It is saying that no matter how large or small the gain is, FOMO drives the player to it, right? Now, how do we emulate this in games? Simply put, I'm talking about more on the early side of things, is your daily login bonus. You create streaks, you create this, oh, unlock the special reward, the bonus gift that comes in. All of this are very exciting factors to drive. We also have customized notifications. It can be like your push and local notification. When you do this, push notifications or local notifications, please make it relevant and impactful. Like, don't dump everything on the player. Identify what is important at the level the player is in. So if they are at a particular level, what is important for them? Is it a new event coming up, or maybe it's a double XP mode, maybe it's double coins mode? What is relevant to the player? You actually make sure you're pushing the right notifications for that. So simple, significant appointment mechanics that entices the player and lets them come back to the game, whether immediately or at a later point of time. So that's what your player callback is going to be about. Now, for the next few pillars, I'll be calling upon Vimal to present the rest. Over to you, Vimal.
Thank you, Poornima. So the third pillar in this case is aspiration. Now, aspiration is something that is inherent to human nature. It sort of gives reason to sort of internalize commitment to something for a longer duration, knowing what you're going to get at the end of that period of time, right? So in games, it's actually super critical to establish this, and the sooner you do it, the better. A lot of games do this, like at least in free to play, within the first couple of sessions or within the first 10-15 minutes of playing the game. This sort of lets the player sort of imagine what could be the possibilities if they continue like engaging with the game, like what they can achieve, how they would progress. It's a very rough direction, rough roadmap even for the players. Now, to continue driving aspiration, certain game features and general access to, say, regular events are also visibly locked behind certain engagement conditions. Say, for example, you reach a certain level, like level 30, and you unlock a certain event, or you collect a certain amount of resources that sort of like unlocks a certain perk. So those are visible aspirations that can be set up along the way. In CSR2, which is the example I'm using here, the game sort of revolves around using real world cars in like this drag racing street or track scenario. It results in like more cars that can be won or collected. You can upgrade these cars, you can improve the performance, and then you can change the looks as well. These cars are all hyper realistic, and it taps into the players' want to get all these real world beautiful gorgeous machines into their garages, like even though it's a virtual garage, but that's where the aspiration lies. Then it becomes like, once you get all this, it's all about like bragging and feeling like the whole thrill of owning and driving these powerful vehicles, right? Now, another example would be in what we would consider Farm 2, right? Farm 2 does this really killer feature where it sounds very small, it sounds like very run of the mill kind of a thing, but within the first 5 minutes, it takes the player to a non-player character's farm, NPC's farm, and it sort of shows you this very high level farm that ideally would take the player close to a year or two to reach, if you have to be like consistently playing and engaging to that kind of a degree. But this farm is so beautifully done and looks super alive and thriving, got all these animals, flowers all in bloom. This sort of also like sets up the kind of aspiration that lets a player know what they get if they commit to that time. They don't know the exact time, but they know this is attainable. Even in this like scenario, certain parts of the farm that are locked to the early player is also like in full display in the NPC's farm. So the player gets to view, interact with it, and like sort of get excited over the whole thing and say, oh, now when I go back to my farm, I know what I want to start unlocking, what I need to look forward to. I'm going to see if I can like draw a parallel to real world so that it reinforces the idea, right? So Poornima stemmed on the whole idea of like exercising and being motivated enough. So I'm going to see if I can like plug in exercising and the gym throughout these pillars. Let's see if it works, right? So in terms of aspiration in this case, right? Yeah, you walk into a gym, right? You see a gym instructor there. That I would think is your immediate aspiration right then and there, knowing that, oh, if I set up enough time, if I ready to like come in and invest that kind of time, I can get a body like this gym instructor or like anyone else you see in the thing. So that is your automatic long-term direction, goal, or aspiration that's been set up. If you move on to the next slide, we'll talk about like the next big pillar, right? Which is win moments and rewards. Part of heading towards these long-term aspirations is setting up win moments. The game would need to constantly encourage the players as they engage with it, and those usually end up in the form of like these smaller win moments or these large landmark moments that give you as big rewards as well. So let's first talk about the win moments before moving on to the two basic types of rewards as visual and functional, and sort of how to pace them in your game. Mini wins can take the form of milestone wins and or bonus wins, depending on what you're looking at. Milestone wins are smaller wins that are obtained as the player sort of heads towards or works towards a larger goal. So if you're familiar with any free to play or live ops games, there are many limited time events that exist, and they always have a grand prize at the end. So the grand prize would be something that I would say takes you a while to get there. It could range anywhere from say a week to a couple of weeks to a month. Like that variation changes based on your game type and your genre, right? And along the way, you have these checkpoints. Now, these checkpoints would be your mini wins or your milestone wins. These serve kind of a course correction or an estimate of how we are doing within this feature itself. So, for example, if a feature has like 4 checkpoints, with the fourth one being your grand prize, and you have to hit all those 4 checkpoints, obviously, but the event lasts only 4 weeks. Now, if you hit the first checkpoint within the first week, you sort of have a rough direction or idea that, yeah, this pacing is right, this is good. But if you hit the first checkpoint in say in a 2 weeks period of time, and you have only remaining 2 weeks to hit the remaining 3, you immediately have to course correct. You know that this is not working out the way you want it to. Landmark moments are these big moments which I mentioned previously, which is a grand prize. They tend to be a little more rarer, and most games have these taking place around, like I mentioned, roughly about 2 weeks time. It depends on the game. These could take the form of, like I mentioned, event completion rewards, but that's not the only way of showing a landmark win moment. It could also be the unlocking of a much awaited feature. Like say you level up, you reach a level 40, and all of a sudden it says, oh, you have unlocked like level 10 of your headquarters. All of a sudden that becomes a landmark win moment as well. Yeah. Now, moving on to, like we just spoke of the win moments, but the reward types that's there. The rewards could be in the form of like cosmetic or functional. Now, I'm not saying they're exclusive. You'll have a lot of rewards that are both cosmetic, they look grand, but also serve like a massive functional thing as well within the game. Now, all games have a mix of these two within cosmetic and functional, but whether it's more cosmetic or more functional depends on the kind of game and your player base for sure. Now, having visual rewards, like when you unlock a visual reward, that high, that kind of excitement, it's really big. You get super excited. You can see it in front of your eyes, and It's something that you've been aiming for. The point over here is that visual rewards tend to be also short-lived because it's very easy to get desensitized to it. And these could actually take the form of like changes to the game board or to the characters, and that gratifying impact, like I mentioned, is for a shorter period of time. The functional rewards, on the other hand, they tend to improve the way players play the game, which sort of tends to drive that sense of mastery or skill improvement. Uh, Also, like visual rewards, functional rewards, if it's more functional, tend to last much longer, but that sheer spike that I was talking to you when it comes with through that visual reward is not as high. That's a general rule of thumb, right? Uh, in this example, like what you have on the slide, on the left side, you have CSR2's upgrades and performance parts that you can put into your vehicles that would make your car better. On the right side is like the cosmetic changes that is used more for bragging and for self-expression. Both you have to work towards, but they're different avenues of how you sort of get better or show off. The next point is also taking care of the pacing of how often you need to have these win moments and rewards. Like I mentioned before, if you have way too much of the win moments and rewards, what would happen is the players would get sort of desensitized to this. And your bigger problem, if you're running a free to play game, is the fact that your production pipelines could get really nasty in the sense that you have to keep getting a lot of like art assets out into the game really quick because the players are actually burning through these rewards because they're like just going through, if you have too less of these win moments or rewards, you would have the other effect where players feel like they're not achieving much, they're not progressing too much, they're putting in too much effort for too little gain, and they can like easily get disenchanted, just that, and they'll just move on from your game. So in this case, now I'm going to use the real world example. If I consider the gym again, right? Uh, in terms of good moments would be when you've been working out and then all of a sudden you have your friends, people who come up to you like, hey, there's something different about you, you're looking good. And that is like a win moment and reward. The flip side of it could be that you've been working out for like 8 months, whatever, like your diet might be wrong or whatever, but you've been working out so much that you've been trying to get a six-pack, but you don't get that six-pack. That could feel like, oh, I'm putting in all this effort, but I'm not getting the rewards I want. And you could like literally like just bounce off and say, this is not worth it. The next pillar would be progression. Now, progression provides a sense of like player engagement and completion. Now, this works well to allow players to unlock new mechanics or features as they like sort of progress through the game. It also helps set up challenges with increasing difficulty with app rewards for their completion. So the players sort of do realize that, oh, as I keep moving on, there is more expected from the next challenge. But I know that if I do complete the challenge, the reward's also going to be greater. Now, if you consider Crazy Cake Swap, which is on the left side of the slide, you will see that it uses map progression. It gives you a gauge of how well as a player you're done in the previous levels and what you have to look forward to. There's also, on the other hand, like in Empires and puzzles, is depicted in the form of like heroes that you can collect and you can sort of build up. There is a little bit of like hand holding or player choice that needs to be done initially. Now we're still talking about like D7 retention, right? So it's still early game. Now, the biggest balance between this hand holding and player choice is super critical. It's because it depends on your player base, depends on the kind of parameters you have within the game and how complex the upcoming challenges are. Now, if you have too much hand holding right in the beginning, saying that, oh, this is the best thing we can do for the players, what happens is that there'll be a set of players who like to strategize, who like to explore ways of how they themselves can come up with strategies to overcome the challenges that are there. So they will easily disengage because they're like, oh, I have nothing to do. I just do what the game's telling me. And this is not fun. This is boring. And they will stop playing, right? And the other flip side of it, if you give too much player choice too early in the game, there's going to be a bunch of players who are like, I don't know what needs to be done. There's so much that needs to be done. And I don't know how to go about it. How do I approach it? How do I strategize? So they could be at a loss. Now, it's easy. You can, like I say, it's easy. It's better. It's easier said than done. But these can be resolved through like play tests to sort of figure out the right pacing and the moment to move from that hand holding to that light goal setting that sort of lets the players have that kind of choice, so they can understand the kind of elements that are involved in overcoming the next challenges that are coming. Now, if I had to use again the gym example, moving from something like cardio, which is what you do right in the beginning, right? When you come in, like, it's just like, oh, get fit, see that you increase your stamina, and then moving on to weights, and then higher weights, and then more intensive exercises, that would be your sort of progression. Now, hand holding was a player choice that would come in the form of like maybe having a gym instructor guiding you every step of the way versus saying, hey, you seem capable of going after what do you need now. If you need any help, let me know, but you're on your own. So I think that would work well as a way of saying player choice versus hand holding when it comes to gym scenario. Um, the next pillar is early economy. This is actually pretty important, early economy. Lots of games do tend to mess this up, or they make it little hard for the players to actually progress through because of this balance that's required. Early economy revolves around your in-game currency sources, we'll call them taps, and the way it is removed from the game, which are called sinks, right? There is a certain balance that needs to be maintained between your inflow of currency and your outflow, because it helps generate a kind of gameplay momentum that the players need to get hooked into. Now, over time, like it could be sessions, it could be days, you could tend to change this balance so that you slow the momentum to a point where the players want to sort of get back to the initial momentum that they're used to. And this is what we call creating a pinch. It sort of slows down the players' trajectory or the momentum that they're used to. This is the point where also a paywall is created. The player sort of decides to make their first critical payment to retain that momentum I've been talking about. Now, why I call it critical is that this is the point where most of your players could become payers. And if they don't convert at this stage, it's a little harder at a later stage to convert them. So there are these points in your game that you have to like work around in terms of balance to get that sorted out. Now, the way you convert them is by having these personalized bundles that come up, like say, oh, starter pack, like it is 50% off, one time only. And then it sort of tempts them because they are in a position where they need that starter pack, and seeing that it is a one-time deal, which it is going to be because you're not going to have this repeated, will entice them to want to make that first purchase. You could even have other kind of sales, bundles. You can have customized packages that come in, right? It is important to know, like while we're talking about all this, that the main objective still remains that you get the player hooked to the core loop and that initial momentum that they are now used to. Only then can you have a good chance at monetization. Players, like before they spend that money, they need to really see value in your game before they realize that, oh, if I spend money, I'm going to get back that much more value. If you're going to like create that paywall too early, they haven't experienced your game enough to feel that kind of value from the game. So hitting this paywall should ideally be around like the D7 point or even later, actually. That's completely fine. It's just that you need to give enough opportunities for your player to get hooked to the core gameplay and get that kind of momentum. Now, in this example over here, we have merged dragons, right? The store sort of depicts, as you can see, eggs, dragon eggs that are available for both premium and secondary currency. Premium currency is harder to get. Secondary currency is something that you can more easily get. The game really highlights like the power of the premium currency that exists over here, right? You get this ultra premium kind of eggs that are available, but for premium currency. And you have all the simpler kind of eggs that are available for the secondary currency. Now, this serves as a good sink for your currency as well, what you are able to purchase within the store. This is just the direct purchasing part of it. But there's another very popular method that everyone who's played free-to-play games would have experienced. That is reducing this initial momentum, that balance between the source and the sink. And how you reduce it is by increasing the difficulty of the challenges that the players face. This sort of reaches a point where the players are then encouraged to use whatever this currency they're earning to say ease the way through it, to skip, to sort of like retry if they failed, to like replenish resources that they've sort of completely exhausted in their attempt to overcome these objectives. It's basically your whole out of moves you want to pay to continue kind of a scenario. Now, if this had to be translated into like overall the gym scenario in terms of early economy, right? What I've been talking about in terms of the momentum, comes into play when you see a lot of these gyms that sort of offer you free sessions, or say first week is free, it's on us. And the idea is that you come in, you experience that kind of workout regime, and then you sort of enjoy it. That's the whole goal, because you're very confident you will, and it's good for you, right? So you'll get that whole hit of like goodness that comes in when you work out. And once that happens and the sessions end, what they do is then they approach you with the whole personalized thing. Are you interested in Zumba? Do you want to do like strength training, or do you want to like actually do bodybuilding? You get that kind of curated or personalized experience, and you can pay accordingly. It can be even like subscriptions that go on for like 1 month, 3 month, a year, and it'll be really cheap. And if you see sense within the initial stages, excuse me, you will move on to buying into that whole subscription model. The next pillar is the whole social or community thing. Like Poornima called out before, for free to play games, like your community, whether it's like on forums or within the game, is super critical. You need to have that kind of interactive element in it. It is what makes your game feel like it's alive. Now a lot of games do have, like, if you consider what we call like whales, like the high payers and free players, it's heavily skewed in favor of players who don't spend too much. You can literally say close to 90% or 95% of your player base are free players. They don't spend too much. And it's only that 5 to 10% who actually spend a lot of money that brings in the revenue. So the having that kind of a social interaction or community within the game and outside will keep the game running, keep it alive. And you need to realize this whole social and community thing is inherent to human nature, right? The whole saying that no man is an island, it is actually very true. What happens is like having shared experiences, having a group of like-minded individuals going through similar experiences tend to sort of bond them together strongly. The stronger the events that you have in the game that drive like either collaboration or competition, the stronger the group becomes. And when experiences are shared between this group, like if it could be even the wins, and I'm explicitly calling out the wins, the more of these wins actually the group has, there is a higher tendency to retain in the game much longer. So the initial days should revolve around building all the tools and all the things that will help foster a community within the game for the players. And then you can think of events and features that can be brought in at a little later stage to help facilitate or encourage that kind of interaction further. Now, again, like I mentioned, it is within the first 7 days, so you don't need to introduce communities and clubs, but make sure you're setting in all these tools that can be leveraged at a later stage. Just a word of caution, strong communities can tend to be a double-edged sword when it comes to retaining players. Now, you could ask, why is it a double-edged sword? It seems like completely fine, right? Well, if you don't sort of maintain a good experience after building that whole initial gameplay feeling around social and community, there is a chance that you could have a prominent member or an important leader or an influencer who leaves the group. And with them, you will start seeing a trickle out effect where a lot of them also follow them, because you need to really realize there are a lot of alternatives to your game out in the app or Play Store, and they will like pick that up. They will move on if they're disenchanted. So one way to sort of tackle this kind of conundrum that you can go into, like, oh, how do we make sure that we are catering to like social groups, but also making sure that we are having this kind of experience built for the game that designers and PMs inherently want, is to maybe even look at a ratio between what would be considered good between a number of solo or campaign events and the number of collaborative or competitive social events that exist. And then over time, you can either maintain the same kind of ratio as you build new features, new events, or you can like look back at your player base at that period in time and then change that ratio, saying that, oh, now we realize that we have lesser players who play solo and we have more players who like the community or the social experience. So then you can slowly start tweaking it towards that group. So those are the 7 pillars overall in terms of like what you would need to build a strong retention within the game. Just to like quickly summarize, make sure you have a good core loop. It needs to be quick. It needs to be really simple to understand, and it needs to lead into that whole habit forming experience. There's player callback, the triggers that get the player back in, because if they already installed the game, they are interested in your game. So don't give them a reason not to come back. Give them all the reasons to come back. Aspiration, like obviously when they're beginning to engage with it, you want to set up that story, that player journey that lets the player know where they can get to, how they can get to, and like what they will get at the end. Having enough win moments and rewards. Don't ruin it by having too much or too little. And that's really hard to make that call on what that balance is, but that's something that needs to be done where they feel rewarded for all the effort they're putting in. Progression for sure, which gives a clear sense of growth and movement towards that better aspiration that exists in the game. A good balance in early economy is critical to maintain a kind of momentum that the players would enjoy and love to get involved in. And last but not least is social, because a sense of belonging through the shared experience will retain players a lot more. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to like talk about this. Poornima and I will actually pick up any questions you have for us.
Thank you very much, guys. This is a pleasure to have you. Thank you for such the informational and educational talk. I believe this is like a very well summarized guide for game design and live ops for your game, right?
Yeah.
So we actually do have some time for like 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So guys who are watching us right now live, please feel free to send your questions to the chat. By the way, we already have one question from Victor Marino, and they ask you the question about monetization. So is monetization a game designer's attribution to determine the monetary value of each transaction present in the game? Or is it like more finance or multidisciplinary thing? Who is handling this and how is it done? Can you comment on that?
Poornima, I'll take this.
Yeah.
All right. So generally, like it depends on obviously the scale of the game and your studio. A lot of startups tend to have designers wearing multiple hats. So there's a lot of trial and error. But as you get into bigger games and bigger studios, we do have specialized groups, like you mentioned finance. So we call them product managers. So there is sort of like a formula or an understanding of what works well and the way to tweak it. And designers just enable that kind of behavior that allows monetization to be better, but the actual call on what the pricing and stuff would belong to that specific vertical, because they would take on the responsibility of like, okay, what is the business outcome of the game over like a year, over a quarter or whatever, whereas designers would tend to be like, how can we build a good experience and not compromise on that even though we have a business goal. So it is a little bit of like, let's run this hand in hand. But if a designer has actually got enough experience working in live ops, they can actually start going and making their own pricing. It's not too hard. I mean, I say not too hard. I mean, like with that kind of data that you have, it becomes easier. Let's say that.
Yeah, just to add to that, we also have to, like, as designers, we would also be ensuring that the money quoted is justified in the game, right? Like whether the value of that item that has been priced at so and so is justified, and it is that aspirational in the game. And the PMs also tend to sometimes try out A/B testing to see which value pack works best for which demographic, and where we maybe it is a lower value pack that gets bought more, eventually leading to better return. So something like that. So essentially, it goes hand in hand. But yeah, like rest everything Vipul has covered.
Thank you very much for this answer. It's great to know. So the next question is from Shiran, and they ask, how do you define success of the games you work with? What are your KPIs? So I guess they mean maybe some KPIs apart from commercial ones, like maybe not the general like installs of the game or the revenue generated, but maybe you have anything else to track the game's success when you work on it.
Should I go?
Go
And
ahead.
you might
Yeah.
can add on. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think there are multiple levels to this. Now, we run live ops predominantly, right? So for us, it's all about like in terms of the scope of the features we are working on. And there is a certain expected return. Now, this expected return in terms of success could deal around like okay, we've seen like a 20% completion rate on this new feature we have built out, or we've seen that we brought in so much revenue. And all this is calculated based on what we have already experienced, or we have references that exist from all the other games that we have worked on. So that's the big advantage of working in bigger studios, is the fact that you have all these references that you can pick up and like start curating and building the thing. Now, Poornima works on something that she's worked on things that on games that you start from scratch, and she has a different set of parameters in terms of what she would consider successes, so she can add on to what I just said. But overall, there are these goals that are calculated based on how much effort you're putting, how much time you're spending in building out the feature, what is your player base, how much of them would be interested in this through maybe consumer insights that you run, and then what would warrant a success would be determined based on these.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we have these discussions internally also, I think the question we ask is like, what does success mean to you as a person from the game, right? From different perspectives. So while we have our business units, we are talking about your retention, engagement, monetization, conversion metrics, which are the standard. We talk about your D1s, D30s, your session length, your CPIs, and all of that. When it comes to say what is the goal of the game, what's the objective of the game as designer. So for me, like to make Farmville the most stress-free, amazing farming simulator game out there. So that will become my goal, and that's what I'm going to aim for. So in that, I'm going to focus a lot more on the player experience, how they engage with it, how much fun they are having, right? And with CSR, while the end goal might be the same, but the approach could be a little more different because of the target audience, the demographic, the aspirations are different, the play time and the sessions and all are very different from these genres. Now, when it comes to say a non free to play game, maybe a hyper casual, maybe it's a premium game or an indie title that you're looking at, there you're not chasing after a live ops metrics. Actually, you need to ensure that your objective is very clear. You know exactly what you want. You're doing a whole lot more of these playtest and beta test, open beta, closed beta, and all of that, because there is no do-over for you. You need to, especially for premium games, you have to get it right, because then it goes to the users. You might get to push in an update maybe once, that's it, but it's not a live ops where you can keep changing the economy, changing all of that. So you ensure you all have all of that. So you do a lot of competitor studies, get all the insights, understand your target audience, make sure your level design progression and all the other 7 pillars we mentioned are already done and dusted before we move into deliverables.
Thank you very much. That's a great and comprehensive answer. So we have a few more questions on the lecture chat, but I believe we have time only for one of them. So the question is from Valentina. Where the one can find resources about game economy and game design? Maybe you can recommend maybe a book or a video or like any piece of content, except your lecture, I mean, of course, what to read and what to watch.
I do have a few links on my website, which is drolife.com. What I have done is, because a lot of people have asked me this question, I've put together a list of links that I follow. So feel free to visit my website and go through all of these amazing sites. And Vimal, yeah, please feel free to add on.
No, just saying that was a shameless plug, Poornima. Well done. No, but I think there are a lot of resources out there. Like, I think some of the more popular ones are like Game Maker's Toolkit. You have extra credits on YouTube. Those are all videos. In terms of websites, I think there's a mobile free-to-play Bible that exists, which is brilliant by itself. Books, tons of them. Now, like back when we started, like 16, 17 years ago, it wasn't as, expansive as it is now. So I think a quick search should start giving you a lot of like hits on like all these kind of topics you want. It's actually not really that hard to find them.
Thank you very much. And I maybe from our end we can add like you should play lots of games to study them, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure. Guys, thank you very much for the great talk. We have a few more questions on the lectures chat on WN Hub platform. So if you do have a few minutes, please mind visiting the page and answering to the people who are asking some great questions there.
Would love to. Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was lovely to have you. Goodbye and take care.
Absolute pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you very much.